Hi there, my name's Randy, and I absolutely love plants. When I think about all the things they do for us in this world, it's amazing. From the clothes we wear, to the food we eat, and even the air we breathe, it's all thanks to plants. And what's even more amazing is how many you can grow right at your very own home. Whether you have a nice backyard, or even just a tiny windowsill, you can grow plants. Some of my favorite plants to grow are the ones you can eat. So why don't you come on with me, and we can learn how to grow together. So when people are just starting out, the first question they ask is, where do I even begin? So we're going to start from the basics. Plants need three basic things to grow. The first and most obvious is light. Now, sunlight is probably the best and most reliable source, but when you can't get any sun, you can provide artificial lighting. Another main factor that plants need to grow, which can often be provided by Mother Nature, is water. But again, when it's not raining outside, you can provide that too. And the third important factor, and this is probably the most often overlooked or underestimated factor, is soil. Now there's a lot of different types of soil that you can use and things you can add to your soil to grow different types of plants, and there's a lot of intricacies that we can get involved in, and we will. But as long as you have those three things, light, water, and soil, you can grow just about anything, anywhere. So now, if we're talking about where, let's talk about the space that you're growing in. Do you have a lot of space? Do you have a little space? Are you growing outside, inside? These are all factors to consider. But remember, just as long as you consider them in terms of those three main things, that's really the way you want to be thinking. So as you can see, my yard here, the first thing that I'm going to consider is the amount of light that I get. Now I'm fortunate to have these big beautiful trees around me, which I love, but they can make it a little hard to grow things because they're going to give me a lot of shade. Now that doesn't mean I can't grow, it just means I adjust what I'm going to grow and how I'm going to grow it. So consider where you're going to grow things and the amount of light that you're going to get. Are you going to need to provide more light, or are you just going to grow different types of things in different types of ways? These are all things to consider, and I understand. You probably have a lot of questions, and that's all right now, because we're all just figuring it out, and again, we're growing together. Now, if you have a big backyard and you want to do a raised bed and you want to plant all kinds of vegetables, that's awesome. I'd say go for it. But again, if you just have a little windowsill, you don't have much space, that's awesome too. Just consider the factors, like I said, sunlight, water, and then if you can determine those things, it might help you determine what you're going to be able to plant and what you might not. Now today, we're going to talk about growing some of my favorite things, which again, are things that you can eat. One of the most popular things to grow, outside or inside, are tomatoes. Now tomatoes do take a little bit of space, but again, you don't need a whole big backyard. You don't even need a yard at all. You can grow them on a patio or on your deck or even inside if you need to. Now tomatoes are a very fun plant for a lot of different reasons. The first of which is that there's a ton of different varieties. Whether you like little cherry or grape tomatoes, or Roma tomatoes, or big beefsteak for slicing and putting in your salads, you can grow all kinds of different types. You can mix and match, and there's all kinds of really neat varieties. There are heirloom tomatoes, or you can go with the newer hybridized tomatoes. Either way, you can have a lot of fun picking and choosing the different things that you like to grow. Because remember, gardening is all about having fun, and whatever you like is what it's all about. So one of my favorite tomatoes is a sun gold tomato. It's kind of like a cherry tomato. It's got an orangish color, and it's really sweet. It's an indeterminate, which means it's just going to keep on growing, and once it starts sprouting fruits, it's just going to keep on fruiting pretty much throughout the season. So what I really like about that, like I said, they're really sweet, so it's nice to kind of come out in the garden every once in a while, tend to your plants, take a few handfuls, and you can just kind of munch on them, or like I said, toss them in salads and do your things. Now again, we're going to consider the three main factors when we grow these tomatoes: light, water, and soil. The one we're going to focus on here is soil. As I said before, this is probably one of the most underrated or overlooked aspects of gardening. Now when you think about it, that's kind of odd. A lot of people will spend a lot of money on fertilizers or really nice big plants and all these other bells and whistles for their garden, and then they'll kind of short on the soil, thinking, well, dirt's just dirt. And it's not quite so simple. If you consider the fact that your plant's going to be getting all of its nutrients and water through this soil, it really makes you realize how important this soil is. Now, you can use any kind of soil you want, but I really like tomatoes, and I want to get as many big, delicious tomatoes as I can, so I'm going to use a particular blend of soil for my tomato plants. Now, one nutrient that your soil can provide that's often overlooked as well, especially for tomato plants, is calcium. Calcium is very important for tomatoes because it helps prevent disease. a lot of tomatoes can be susceptible to blight or what's called blossom end rot. And what's really disappointing about blossom end rot is that you'll have this beautiful tomato coming along, looking great, and right when it's about to ripen, all of a sudden on the bottom of it, you have an ugly brown spot and you can't eat that tomato anymore. The problem is that plant probably didn't have quite enough calcium. So we're going to talk about this particular blend of soil I like to use to make sure that my tomatoes grow big, delicious, and healthy. So come on with me, we'll dive in and we'll get down and dirty with some soils here. All right, now to make sure my tomato has plenty of calcium so that they grow big and healthy, I'm going to use a special type of compost called lobster compost. And it's actually made out of composted lobster shells, which have a ton of chitin and calcium, which is going to be great for your tomatoes. I get this particular variety from Coast of Maine Organics. They make a lot of great soil amendments. And this bag's from Sorghum Home and Garden, but you can find this product or similar products at any of your local garden centers. And I'm going to put this into this big pot right here. Now, you don't necessarily need a pot quite that big for tomatoes, but when it comes to growing tomatoes, especially a sun gold like the one I'm going to grow now, bigger is better. So if you're not quite that big, that's okay, but I wouldn't recommend growing it in a little tiny pot. But if you do, that's okay. Your plant's going to survive. It's just going to be smaller, and you might have smaller tomatoes. Me, however, since I have the space and I've got plenty of room for tomatoes, I'm going to grow as many big tomatoes as I can, so I'm going to put this into this pot. Another important thing to consider about this pot is drainage. Now, again, another of our main factors in growing plants is water. However, too much water can be an issue. What you want to avoid is your plant ever sitting in a puddle. So this pot, like most growing pots, have some holes in the bottom. If yours doesn't have holes, you might want to consider drilling some holes in the bottom so that water can drain out. You want your soil to be evenly moist, kind of like a moist sponge. However, if it's so moist that you were to squeeze that sponge and a bunch of water would be pouring out, what's going to happen is your roots are going to rot. And the tricky thing about when roots rot is that they stop working. So the plant can't get any water, so it actually looks like it's drying out. So what a lot of people will do is pour more water on, not knowing that they're actually making the problem worse. But if you've got some good drainage, you don't have to worry about that, especially with a good soil like this. So we're going to mix this in with another bag here. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up. And the easiest way to do that with these bags is kind of just like a big bag of chips. So I'm just going to rip that open there and see how it pops open. And if you look at that soil, it's really nice, black, rich, crumbly soil, and that's what you want. So I'm going to go ahead and start pouring that in our pot. And I'm going to maybe just pour like a third of the bag or so, because as I said, I'm going to mix this with another soil, and I'll tell you why I'm going to do that in just a moment here. So let me grab my other bag. Now this bag here is another organic soil from Coast of Maine, and this is more of a potting soil. The reason I'm mixing this with my lobster compost is to allow, again, a little bit more aeration so that the plants are never sitting in a ton of water. The compost is great, but it's a little heavy for what I like to grow in. Now this potting soil has some other additives that are going to allow a little more airspace and allow that water to drain nice and evenly. So again, I'm just going to open that like a big old bag of chips, and you'll see this is a little lighter. It's got a little of those white things, which is just some perlite, again, to add some airspace in our soil. And again, maybe I'll dump about a third of that bag in there like that. Now you could always mix this in a wheelbarrow or a big bin. You could also use like a hoe or a shovel, but me, I don't mind getting dirty. Sometimes that's part of the fun. So I'm just gonna go little by little and mix my soils together by hand there. All right, get them all nice mixed up evenly, and we'll fill up our pot slowly but surely with that good calcium-rich soil. Now another thing that this Gardener's Gold soil has that I find really neat, and it's hard to find, is actually called mycorrhizal fungi. And it's a type of fungus that's going to grow on your plants. And you're probably thinking, fungus, that sounds bad. Now in some cases it is. In some cases you'll get disease from too much water. But this type of fungus actually grows on your roots, and in a symbiotic relationship will extend your root system and help your plants get that much more water. So it kind of gives your plants an extra boost. So as you can see, I'm just kind of little by little, again, mixing my soil nice and evenly, and I'm going to fill up my pot just about to the top there. All right, we're just getting there. I might add one more bag of potting mix. Just like I said, I've got all that good space to grow in, so I'm gonna go ahead and use it up. Alrighty, once we've got our pot just about full, we're gonna be ready for the most fun part, which is to plant. All right, so now we're looking at a full pot. We're gonna go ahead and grab our tomato. So like I said, I like a sun gold tomato, and you'll see this one's kind of long and stretching out for sunlight. It's a little late in the season, it's about mid-June, but don't think that's too late. Sometimes people make the mistake of thinking, well, I missed May, now I can't grow any tomatoes. There's no strict deadline here. Plants are plants, they're gonna grow as long as they can and as long as you help them grow. So if you're a little late, who cares? Plant them and see what happens. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with my tomato, and the first thing is obviously to take it out of that grow pot. So we're just gonna kind of gently wiggle it out here. And all right, we've got a nice root system on that. So you'll see it looks kind of modest next to our big pot here, but it's gonna fill that out quicker than you can believe. Now I could just plant that right in the soil like that if I wanted to, but a trick about tomatoes is that if you ever look really closely at a tomato stem, you'll see all these little tiny white hairs. And what's neat about those fibers is that they all have the potential to grow roots. So I could have this little root system here and grow a tomato and it'll be fine. Or I could take advantage of all this plant here and turn that all into root system, which is going to grow that much bigger and healthier of a tomato. Because again, remember, the soil and the roots is where your plant is getting all of its nutrients and really all of its source of energy from. So how I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to take my pruners and I'm just going to prune off all those leaves down there, so I'm leaving it with just stem. Now your plant's going to look a little sad and funny, but trust me, that's okay. So I'm going to go all the way to the top of that plant there. So you see it's just got kind of a few little leaves there at the top, and it looks a little sad right now, but trust me, it's going to pay off in the end. Now to plant this, I'm going to plant this almost all the way down in that pot there. Now this is easy to do with potting soil like I just filled up. That potting soil is still pretty loose and I can dig in it pretty readily. If you're planting your tomato plants in the ground or in a raised bed, you might be thinking, oh no, I have to dig a hole that deep now? Not necessarily. What you can do is you can do what's called trench planting, and you could just dig like a little trench and lay your tomato down actually, just leaving that top part of the plant exposed. And the sunlight's gonna do the work for you, and that plant's gonna find the light and it'll grow up straight and tall, and that still allows you to take advantage of the whole stalk of that plant to turn that into root system. Like I said though, I'm gonna pretty much plant mine straight down since I can, so I'm gonna dig out about an arm-sized hole in my soil here. Again, if you don't like getting dirty, that's fine. You can always use a spade or a shovel to do this, but me, that's part of the fun. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get down there real deep and simply at this point, pretty much just drop it in there. So you'll see, again, I'm getting almost all of that tomato deep down in there, and I'm doing this pretty much right in the center of my pot. Now, I'm just gonna take some soil and evenly distribute it around that plant, just like that, so that now my tomato that was about 2 feet tall is really just about 5 inches or so tall now. But again, now that that's all in that nice, rich, calcium-boosted soil, those little fibers are all about to take off and really give all this plant a ton of nutrients and energy, and it's just gonna explode on you. Now I'm gonna do a couple more things before I say this is done planting. One thing, I am gonna add just a little bit of fertilizer. Even though that soil is very rich, has a lot of organic matter, and everything that plant needs to grow, it doesn't hurt to give it a little boost sometimes. So I'm just gonna use a granular vegetable fertilizer here, and I'm just gonna kind of evenly sprinkle that around this tomato and just kind of work it into that top inch or so of soil here. Now, if you're worried about what kind of fertilizer, don't stress it. Most vegetable fertilizers or all-purpose fertilizers are just fine. You want something with a high middle number, they call it. So any fertilizer has some nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the 3 numbers that you'll see on a fertilizer bag. And an easy way to remember what those chemicals will do is up, down, and all around. So nitrogen fertilizer has to do with promoting upward growth. The phosphorus actually has to do with the down part of it. So that's going to really focus on root growth. And then the all around, the potassium, has to do with bushing out and more so with the disease prevention aspect of things. Now again, since the root system is really where all the energy is coming from for this plant, and since fruit, like tomato, takes a lot of energy, I really want to give these roots as much energy as I can. So anytime you're looking for a fertilizer for tomatoes or any other vegetables, you want to look for something with a higher middle number. So this has got a little bit of a high phosphorus level, just so we can really make sure that those roots take off. Now, one final step before I'm done planting this tomato is to give it some support. Now, it doesn't need much now. I'm not talking about emotional support. I'm talking about physical support here. So even though it's just a few inches tall now, in a few weeks, this plant is going to be going wild. And tomatoes are actually naturally vining. If you ever see a tomato growing without any support, or as it naturally would, it's going to be sprawled out all over the ground. But in order to promote healthy fruit development and to save space and to make things easier for me whenever it's time to pick those fruits, I'm going to add some support. You can do this in multiple different ways. Some people like to just do a straight up wooden stake. Some people will rig up trellises and things like that. I'm going to use a product specifically made for tomatoes, a tomato cage. Now again, I like big, hardy tomatoes, so I'm going to use a pretty substantial tomato cage here. And I like these because they're pretty much ready to go. They're already in the shape that a tomato plant's going to like, and it's very simple to install. I'm just going to carefully around that plant right in the center of my pot, stick it down in there nice and deep. Now again, this might look kind of funny right now, but you just wait in a few weeks as that plant is going to grow up through the middle of this. It's got a lot of nice support that's going to keep it up straight and tall so that I can pick those plants. All right, so that's pretty much it from start to finish. We've planted a tomato, and it won't be long before we're picking these off and enjoying some delicious treats. Now, I'm starting to get a little hungry, so I think I'm going to plant some other things. So another favorite of my vegetables is peppers. So why don't you join me and we'll go ahead and dive into planting some peppers. All right, so just like my tomato, I'm going to get a big old pot with plenty of drainage, and I'm going to get a good mix of soil. So we've got some potting soil. I'm going to add some lobster compost to this one as well. All right, and we'll go over here and we'll start planting our peppers. All right, just like the last pot, we're going to go ahead and open our bags and start mixing together some good nutrient-rich soil, just like we did the last time. And again, to reiterate, these pots have a lot of nice drainage to them, so my plants are never going to sit in water. Another thing to consider about your pots is the material. These are plastic, which is nice in terms of practicality. It might not be the most aesthetically pleasing pot in the world, but what's nice about plastic is obviously it's lightweight, so even when these are full of dirt, I can still move them around if I have to, whether I decide a different spot in the garden might be better for them, or if I just want to give them a turn so that they get some nice even light, I can do that with these plastic pots. Another nice thing about the plastic is that it's pretty good in terms of retaining water. If you like to plant in ceramics or terracotta, that's fine. You just have to understand that terracotta is a porous material, so in that hot summer heat, it's going to act kind of like a wick, and it's going to pull water out of your soil, so plants are going to dry out just a little faster. Again, that's fine. You just have to make sure that you don't forget about them whenever the summer heat comes. Just make sure you get them some water. All right, so I'm just mixing in some of that lobster compost along with my potting soil. Even though peppers are not as susceptible to the blossom end rot and other types of fungal diseases as tomatoes might be, that calcium and that lobster compost, as well as the other organic matter, is going to be really good in terms of giving them the nutrients they need. As I said, a lot of people overlook the importance of soil, but having a really good soil blend is going to help with a few things. Not just giving the plants the nutrients it needs, but it's going to help hold on to water in the right way. So you're going to be watering less often, and you're not going to have to worry about your plants rotting quite so much or drying out. It kind of helps in both ways in terms of keeping a nice, evenly moist soil. So we've got our pot just about full here, and I think I'm going to kind of mix it up with the pepper planting here, and we're going to go ahead and do a combination pot. So what that means is I'm going to mix 3 different types of peppers in one, because I like peppers, like I said, and I like a lot of different types of peppers. And this is a good technique to use if you don't have a lot of space, if you just have a patio garden, or you just want to have a pot on your deck next to your grill where you can pop off some peppers and throw them right in with your grilling. You can do that. So we're going to go ahead and talk about how you do that right here. A few of my favorite peppers. I like spicy things, but not too spicy. So I'm going to go ahead and do this one here. It's called an Ancho San Martin pepper. It's just a type of poblano pepper. So it's kind of got a medium heat. It's going to be about a medium-sized green pepper. Again, I get this from Sorghum Home and Garden, but you can certainly find plenty of different types of peppers at any of your local garden centers. Or if you'd like to start from seed, go ahead and check out the seed varieties. There's tons and tons of different peppers for whatever types of flavors you like or the amount of heat that you like. Now, since I'm going to be planting this with a couple other plants, I'm not going to do it right in the center of my pot like I did with my tomato. I'm going to leave some space for my other peppers. And again, this is a pretty nice big pot, and the peppers are going to pretty much fill it all up with those roots and with their actual vegetative growth on top. So we're going to try and give them as much space as we can without kind of going overboard here. So just like I did with my tomato, I'm going to dig a hole. Now, except the difference between the peppers and the tomatoes is if you look at the pepper, you're not going to see those little white hairs like you did with the tomato. So I'm not going to bury this one too deep, because if you do that with a pepper as opposed to a tomato, this root is actually going to, the stem's actually going to rot rather than sprouting out a whole bunch of roots. So we don't want to do that with the peppers. So there's a slight difference there. So we're just going to maybe dig a slightly smaller hole, and just like planting any plant, we're going to go ahead and make sure we cover all those roots with our nice, rich, organic matter-based soil. So there we go. It looks kind of lonely there on the side of his pot. So there's my Ancho San Martin, and I'm going to mix that up with another kind of medium heat pepper. This one's called the New Mexican Hatch pepper, and it's kind of more like a chili pepper. This one's really cool because, like I said, if you have it out by your grill, these are going to fruit nice, long chili peppers, a medium heat, and you could actually just toss them right on the grill, flame grill them right there, and they're perfect with a side of steak or whatever you like. Right on the skewer, they're great. Right off the plant and on the grill there. So I'm going to go ahead and plant this one with my poblano and just wiggle it out of the grow pot as I always would. You see I got some nice roots there. It's not root bound, but it's certainly got a nice healthy root system. And I'm just going to basically kind of evenly distribute these in thirds around the pot. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one kind of catty corner to my other one. And just like before, make sure I plant those roots right in the soil there, get them all covered up nice and evenly by our soil. All right, so we've got two down and space for probably about one more. So my third pepper I'm gonna add here is called a hot Hungarian wax pepper. Again, I like kind of spicy things, but it's not too spicy. It's not something that's gonna make me running for a glass of milk and some bread. It's got a little bit of kick to it. It's good on sandwiches and salads. I actually like to take these and pickle them, so you could have some pickled peppers, save them in the fridge, and use them, pretty much all winter long. So I'm going to go ahead and, again, using about a third of this pot, just kind of stick it right in there next to the other ones, just kind of digging out a hole about the size of my roots there, and just very evenly cover that up. Now, just like the tomato, I am going to fertilize these. However, I'm probably not going to fertilize them quite as much. I'm going to be a little bit more sparse on the fertilizer. And the reason for that is, even though peppers are also very vigorous growers, I have personally found, now you might get some different reports from other people, but in my own personal gardening endeavors, I found that if you over fertilize a pepper, you're going to get this big, beautiful plant that's super happy and just pumping out leaves and all kinds of growth. And it's so happy that it just wants to keep growing, and it kind of forgets about actually fruiting any peppers. So sometimes if you hold back on your fertilizer just a little bit, the plant's going to have just enough stress in its life to think, uh-oh, maybe I should try and actually reproduce and make some peppers that are going to obviously have the seeds in them that the plant will be able to continue its lineage. So I'm not going to fertilize it quite as much, maybe just a little bit, and throughout the season I will continue a little bit less fertilization on my peppers than other plants. So these are just about ready. One other thing I'm going to do is provide some support for them, just like I did with my tomato. Now, differently than the tomato, peppers are not vines. They're more of kind of what you would think of most plants as growing on a stalk and bushing out from there. So rather than using a trellis system in which the plant's going to be able to climb and grab onto, I'm just going to use more of a traditional stake here. So these are some old kind of bamboo stakes. You can use any kind of gardening stake, anything that's straight and rigid. And what I'm going to do is on each one of those, I'm just going to get it nice and deep right next to my stem. All right, and get it real deep into the base of the pot so that's nice and sturdy there. And as that plant grows up, I can just take a little piece of twine or a twisty tie and just kind of, give it somewhere to hold on to so that whenever maybe a storm blows through or things like that, those plants are going to have something nice and sturdy to hold on to so that they can keep growing even when they're loaded down with tons of delicious peppers. So I'm going to go ahead and toss one of those in, again, right next to each one of those, nice and deep. And so it's about just evenly. I'm going to angle them outward just a little bit so as those plants grow, they're going to have plenty of room to do so that they aren't crowding each other out. So I'm just going to take 3 of those, plant them in there. And again, it looks kind of funny right now as they start off, but it won't be long before these are climbing up those stakes and really taking off for you. Now that we have everything planted, one last thing that I nearly forgot about, perhaps the most important thing of keeping your plants alive, is watering them. We often get asked, how often do I water this? And basically the short answer is whenever it's dry. Now I just planted these, and anytime you just plant plants, you want to make sure you water them in. But if later in the summer you just stick your finger in that pot and it feels like it's a little dusty and dry, don't be afraid to just go ahead and give it a nice even watering all the way around and really saturate that soil. Again, if you have proper drainage, you shouldn't have to worry about that water staying in there. It's going to drain out nice and you're going to have all the water you need to keep things growing. So there you go. That's kind of the top to bottom how to plant some vegetables in containers for you. Again, you can have a whole backyard or you can just have a deck or a patio and you can grow your plants. If you don't like tomatoes or peppers, that's fine. Still, the basic core concepts of making sure your plants have light, water, and really nutrient-rich soil are going to be all you need to know to make sure that you can grow anything that you like to grow. So hopefully you found that helpful, and we'll go ahead and keep on working in our garden here.